to the third edition of BioConnect, connecting science to business. Kerala is all set to spotlight its growing life sciences ecosystem with BioConnect 3.0, the International Life Sciences Conclave and Expo. This much anticipated edition brings together global innovators, researchers, investors in advancements across biotechnology, healthcare, digital health, and allied sectors. From transformative ideas to tangible impact, BioConnect 3.0 will serve as a powerful platform where science meets business and innovation meets investments. Once again, a very warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We begin the conclave now. To set the context for the third edition of BioConnect, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite Shri APM Mohammed Hanish IAS, Principal Secretary, Industries, Government of Kerala, inviting him onto the dais to address the gathering.
The Chairman, Kerala State Industrial Development Corporation, Mr. C. Balagopal, my colleagues from the Kerala State Industrial Development Corporation and Kerala Life Science Park, eminent personalities from the field of biosciences and life sciences in general, academicians, entrepreneurs, startup mentors, researchers, enthusiasts, ladies and gentlemen. BioConnect is an idea that had its beginnings a few years back. The essential purpose of BioConnect was to ensure that the latent, inherent strengths of Kerala, the state in the southwestern corner of the country of India, is manifested in a much larger way on the global scene in terms of the translation of the research and development results into absolutely viable, marketable products, which would certainly pave the way for better services, better utility, and better deal of innovations in the field of life sciences. With this in view, the government of Kerala had actually embarked on an ambitious program with the establishment of the Life Science Park near to Trivandrum, exclusively for catering to the different sectors of biosciences, namely the nutraceuticals, genomics, and so on and so forth. This is the third edition of BioConnect 3.0. Essentially, the connecting science to business. That's the motto which we have for these 2 days. We started off yesterday, kicked off yesterday, I should say, with a lovely evening. And after that, today, here we are in terms of taking off with the discussions here. We have with us such extraordinary personalities like Mr. Tim Rowe, CEO, Cambridge Innovation Center and co-founder, LabCentral Boston. And thereafter, we go on to how Kerala's potential could be unleashed in this sector, and thereafter on to transformation of Kerala to a medical devices hub. We also focus on how artificial intelligence becomes important in the sphere of health and life sciences. And the future healthcare 5.0 is also to be focused upon. Many are the challenges that have been posed as a result of the advent of mankind into new systems and new approaches and new styles of life as well. Today we are face to face with epidemic after epidemic, lots of new ailments coming in, which have that recurrence as well. So what do we do about it? More than that, it calls for a greater deal of application into the finer aspects of life sciences and biosciences. But then ultimately the challenge happens when these results in the lab ultimately have to be translated into viable prototypes and thereafter into absolutely well-marketed products which can serve the cause of the mankind. Then we have The application in genomics and healthcare is also to be looked into. And today evening, we have the formal inaugural ceremony as well. And as a parallel track, we also have the discussions conducted by the Kerala Kerala State Council for Science and Technology, and also the pitching by the R&D institutes is also there. Tomorrow we have the bioeconomy, the Kerala's bioeconomy and the global bioeconomy at large. What are the opportunities and the potential? And the genius innovation that can happen in the sphere of pharma is also to be focused upon. Nutraceutical products developed and the building products using science is a major venue wherein we need to focus. And we have people like Mr. Arun Balakrishnan and others over here. And the regulatory framework is also most important. Most often we see that certain countries have done well in biosciences. At the same time, when it comes to the rigorous application of the principles of the regulatory framework, some of them fail. Maybe because of extraneous factors as well. At the same time, this has been a reality which has been happening. Kerala does very well in terms of rubber cultivation and natural rubber production. Now, for the medtech purpose, how do we use this rubber? This is something about which we have a totally, absolutely distinct parallel track, parallel session that runs through the whole of tomorrow as well. And finally, the acceleration of this technology translations and the global perspective is also to be looked into. All put together, we intend to really try to, bring in that connecting the dots and also see to it that a greater deal of synergy is created between companies, the academia, and also about the kind of technology transfer that can happen. This ultimately, the core strengths of Kerala in the field of medical devices, for instance, 20%, at least 20% of the total turnover of the Indian companies in the medtech sector happens to come from companies that are located in Kerala. For instance, the largest manufacturer of gloves in the world, surgical gloves in the world, happens to be our Honorable Chairman, Mr. C. Balagopal, and his company Terumo Penpol. Similarly, in Ayurveda, nutraceuticals, we have been doing quite well. The technology transfer is something which we have to really talk about, see to it that MOUs are done, agreements are done, and certainly we transfer that to businesses as well. New products are to be developed, existing ones have to be remodeled, restructured, reoriented as well. And finally, the process of bringing in these products to the market is something which we need to do from the lab to the field. This is where the universities, the venture capitals, the government agencies, entrepreneurs, startups can do a great deal of work. Pitching session for the startups is also arranged. All put together, by tomorrow evening, we should really see to it that the flowering of a brilliant idea inside a lab ultimately gets translated to a brilliant product which is ready to serve the mankind. I won't even use the word market for that matter, even though the market matters. But at the same time, I would certainly hasten to add that this is an ecosystem. Kerala has provided the best possible talent pool, good R&D facility, and also exclusively designated parks for this purpose, like the Life Science Park, which some of you might have seen yesterday afternoon onwards. And we would really wish that in terms of the industry policy and other things, which I would like to elucidate later after the first most illuminating talk by Mr. Tim Rowe, we would certainly take up that. So this is the context in which this BioConnect 3.0 starts off. We would feel that by the end of tomorrow evening, very many connects will be made between the researchers, the marketing agencies, the companies, the startups, and also about the kind of translation, the facilities that can be made as far as technology transfers and as well as the lab results are transferred. This is where we have to focus upon. It's a wonderful day, and we are on the banks of one of the most lovely beaches of the state, Kovalam. I hope you enjoyed the stay as well. Be comfortable, be good, and at the same time, let's try to create such energizing, enriching talks and discussions through the day and tomorrow as well. Thank you very much, and I hereby formally invite Mr. Tim Rowe onto the stage. Over to you, madam, please.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so when I received the kind invitation from Bio360 to come speak here in Kerala, I was very excited to accept, and I want to tell you why. As a student in the United States, when I graduated, I came to visit India. And I landed first in Calcutta. This was in 1990. And of course, this was only a little over 3 decades since independence. And this was a very exciting time for India. Some parts of India were still very much developing. But as I talked to people, they said there's one part of India which is very advanced, kind of like California. And I said, tell me about this place. And they said, Kerala. So I traveled overland by train from Calcutta to Kerala, and I explored this part of the country. I loved it. So a little while later, I was a graduate student at MIT, and one of my professors, a man named Thomas, so the name probably sounds like maybe a Kerala name, was of course from Kerala. He had grown up here. He moved to Bombay, where they put him in charge of the trash collection, I guess, and he rose to become the chairman of Hindustan Lever. And as a student, he became a mentor of mine, and he guided me in business. And I thought, this is a really brilliant man. I wonder about these people from Kerala and everything they bring. So when you hear about Kerala today, people are always talking about how Kerala is a place with very strong talent. And I would just want to say, from the perspective of an American, I believe that. That's true in my experience. In fact, I'm here today because a close friend of mine, also from Kerala, is the CEO of a life sciences company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's an MIT graduate, like I am. And he said, please come to my home state in India and share what you know. So that is why I'm here. It's a long trip from Boston, but I was very happy to come. So I'm going to tell you a story. Is there a clicker or? Great. There we go. I'm going to tell you a story today, and I hope you find this interesting. My expertise is about supporting innovation and growing innovation districts and innovation ecosystems. And I'm going to tell you both a historic story and a modern story. And maybe this will be an inspiration as you continue to grow the Kerala economy. As you know, as the previous speaker said, I'm the founder of a place called LabCentral, which is the world's largest shared wet laboratory. It's at MIT, and a place called Cambridge Innovation Center, which is the world's largest cluster of startups in one place, also in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But this is an older story. So an entrepreneur moves across the ocean to a new city, and he founds a company. This is a familiar story. His startup idea is a really good one, really good startup idea. In fact, at his time, maybe this is the biggest unicorn idea of all time. And this is a true story, remember. This is not a joke. It's bigger than Apple's iPhone. Some people think the technology is so amazing that it's magic. And of course, any really good technology is indistinguishable from magic, as you know. His company becomes one of the most successful companies of all time. When did this happen? In 1876. And maybe some of you know who I'm talking about. This was Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, of course, right? His product, the telephone. This was the first time in history that sound was transmitted at a distance, and it changed the world. He was an immigrant to Boston from Scotland. Of course, he founded Bell Telephone, which became the basis of all telephone companies. It's a cool story, right? And many startup stories are like that. But there's a bit more to this story. So this guy has a rival. I don't know if you know who his rival was. He wanted to be bigger than Bell. And who could have been bigger than Bell? He thinks he has an even better idea. What could that have been? And he's actually right. His idea is bigger than Bell's. There are many more of his products than there are telephones. His product is so big that it becomes the definition of inventing a product. What did he invent? The light bulb. Of course, you know this story as well, right? His name, of course, you know, is Thomas Edison. Okay? Of course, electric light transforms the world. We all know these stories. This is not new for you, but I'm going to tell you something that is new, okay? There's a part of the story that nobody knows. These guys actually worked in the same building. Nobody knows this. There was a building in Boston called 109 Court Street. In the low part of the building, on the ground floor, there was a store, a shop, that carried electronic components. In the 1870s, you could buy batteries and you could buy wires in the shop, switches, things like that. Of course, these things you could get in any shop now, any electronic shop, but at that time, there were probably very few electronic shops in the world, right? So these inventors decided this would be a good place to go, and the owner of the building, a guy named Charles Williams, he rented the upstairs rooms to the inventors. So in fact, this room up here on the top in the corner, that was Alexander Graham Bell's room where he invented the telephone. So in the shop downstairs, there was a shopkeeper. He was one of the employees named Louis Latimer, and he happened to be very good at drawing. He could draw really very clear pictures, better than anybody. And the interesting thing is that both Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison hired the same man to draw the patents. So the patent for the telephone and the patent for the light bulb were actually drawn by the same person. Now, why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because this was probably the first startup hub in the world. And there are some lessons from it for us in the world, but also here in Kerala. What happens in a startup hub is that people come together. People can learn from each other in ways that you cannot when you're independent, when you're separate. So yesterday, I was fortunate to take a tour of Bio360. Praveen, who's somewhere here, and his team were kind enough to take us around and show us what they're building. The plug-and-play center for startups, the virology center. These things, they're just buildings, but they are also startup hubs. And they're very important. I'm going to share a little bit later some of the lessons that we have about how to make them most successful. I also think you're on the right track here in Kerala. But first, I'm going to share some data about why they're important. So this is a study done at MIT, and they looked at cooperation between professors, and they measured that by patents that have been filed with 2 professors' names on the patent. And they looked at the distance between the desks of the professors. So how far apart are the professors' desks on the campus, and how many patents did they produce? And what you see is a very clear pattern. The professors that are less than about 400 feet between their desks produce a lot of patents. The professors who are about 2,400 feet, about half a mile apart, they don't produce any patents together anymore. What this says is that collaboration is a function of distance, very, very clearly. We all know this intuitively, but to see the data is really interesting. And this is why we need to build these hubs and make them strong. Some people looked at this data. I know the researcher who did this, and they said to the researcher, okay, fine, but maybe there's a flaw in your research. Maybe the reason that the professors who are near each other produce a lot of patents is that departments are concentrated. So of course the biology professors are in the same building and they're collaborating, so that's why they're producing so many patents. Maybe distance is not so important. So the researcher said, okay, good question. So he did another study, and what he looked at was MIT professors who had their offices in 2 different buildings, and then later, for some reason, they were moved into the same building. So it's before and after with the same pairs of professors. And what they found was that up until time 0, this is when they were in 2 separate buildings, and this is when they were in the same building. And they looked at the number of scientific papers that they published with both their names on it as a metric of collaboration. So what you find is that even when they're on the same campus, just moving into the same building dramatically increases their collaboration. Again, I'm sharing with you the science because later, as we talk about how to build innovation hubs, it's important to understand how important they are. The function of these hubs is to move ideas forward. This is not really a new idea, just like innovation hubs were already important in the 1800s. Alfred Marshall is one of the great economists of the UK, and I'll just be silent for a moment while you read this. It's kind of obvious again, but I want you to really understand this concept as we go into how to build hubs. I don't know if you can see all the words, so maybe I'll say it. Great are the advantages which people following the same skilled trade get from near neighborhood to one another, being close to one another. The mysteries of the trade become no mysteries. They are but, as it were, in the air. Good work is rightly appreciated. Inventions and improvements in machinery, in processes, and in general organization of the business have their merits promptly discussed. If one man starts a new idea, it is taken up by others and combined with suggestions of their own, and thus becomes the source of yet more ideas. So in the 1800s, we understood this already. We need to create these near neighborhoods of experts in the same fields. I spoke with Mr. Jacobs early about spices, and I'm sure that in the spice world there is much knowledge, much wisdom, and Kerala is strong in that because here in Kerala so many people understand that. The information about spices is in the air, right? And that makes Kerala stronger in this. This is also understood today. This is a quote from Steve Jobs, founder of Apple Computer, of course. He said, "There is a temptation in our networked age to think that ideas can be developed by email and iChat. That's crazy. Creativity comes from spontaneous meetings, from random discussions. You run into someone, you ask what they're doing, you say, wow, and soon you're cooking up all sorts of ideas." Of course, Apple Computer became and usually is the most valuable company in the world, and it doesn't really make anything besides ideas. Mostly the products are made in India or China or somewhere else. So again, we understand that these collisions are important. So I'll tell you a story of a modern company that follows this. So a friend of mine, a guy named Rich Miner, he built a voicemail company. He sold it for $200 million. So he's a rich guy. And he was interested in mobile phones. So Orange, the UK mobile phone company, now I think part of France Telecom, they got him to run an innovation center for them in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I'm from. And when he was at Orange, he had this idea that the mobile phone operating systems were very bad. You remember, this was the era of Nokia, Symbian, Phone OS, these very basic, this was before the iPhone. And he said, we can do better. Maybe mobile phones should use a open source operating system. And the Orange management thought about this and they said, no, we don't understand why you would want an open source mobile phone operating system. You're going to give away the value. That's a bad idea. So he said, okay, and he left Orange and he founded Android. How many of you have Android in your pocket today? Okay, about half of you, right? Maybe more. So he had a friend. They were doing Android in their apartments, like many entrepreneurs do. And he called me and he said he needed an office. And so he moved into Cambridge Innovation Center, into my center. And slowly, over the period of 3 years, in secret, they built this company. On the door, it said Android, but nobody knew what this was. And of course, when they came out with it, this was after Steve Jobs had released the iPhone. And people thought, okay, Apple owns this industry. Nobody can break into this industry. Apple is the king. But actually, Android was in many ways a better idea. And if you include tablets, I believe that Android now has an 80% market share worldwide. Even though Apple has high prices and is a very good product, Android is an even better product in some ways. So these products come out of this milieu of smart people within a few blocks from each other in Cambridge, places like Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it can also be here in Kerala. By the way, there's a story that I think is not public about Android that I'll share with you, so please don't tweet this. But a few months after they founded Android, Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO of Google at the time, contacted them, and he said, I heard you're working on an open source mobile phone operating system, and we'd like to talk to you about acquiring your company. And the company was only 3 months old at the time. And so Rich and his co-founder Andy said, no, timing's not right. We don't want to talk to you. And Eric Schmidt was very frustrated. He's not used to people saying no to him. And so he wrote a check for $1 million, and he sent it to them, to the founders of Android. And he said, okay, come and speak with me, and if the conversations go nowhere, you can keep this check. What do you think they did? So they went to talk to him, of course, and the conversations went well, and of course Google bought Android, and now that's why we call it Google Android. The analysts tell me that about 1/3 of the value of Google is Android, so it's worth about $700 billion today. This is how these ideas come about, from these small conversations in the hallways in the neighborhoods. So now a little bit more about the organization I founded, Cambridge Innovation Center. We were a few friends from MIT. We got together to build startups, but there was no place for startups. There was no room where they wanted startups. The traditional landlords said, okay, I want a long lease, and I want you to have good credit. And we didn't have credit, and we couldn't enter to a long lease because we had nothing. And so finally, we convinced MIT itself to give us one building, a small part of a building. It was about 3,000 square feet. And we started inviting multiple startups into the space. We called it Cambridge Innovation Center. About 15 years later, a professor at MIT did a heat map of startups around MIT, and that big dot is Cambridge Innovation Center. Basically, we kept growing, and all the startups kept moving into this one building. As I said earlier, we think this is now the world's largest hub of startups in one place. It's several buildings around a street corner. The modern founding story, I was going to tell it here, is about Android, so I've already told you that. We're now in 10 cities. We have about 1.4 million square feet, something like that, in different places, offices and laboratories. And we believe we're the largest startup space in 5 countries at the moment. Next year, we hope to open in Seoul, Korea, and we have a project in development in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So we've had about 11,000 companies come through our spaces at CIC, and we've tracked about $40 billion of investment into those companies. The big success is the biggest name, of course, is Android, but there were others. One was a company called HubSpot, founded by an Indian entrepreneur named Dharmesh Shah, that some of you know. He was a student at MIT and came in as just one person. The company is now public with a multi-billion-dollar valuation. Again, a very common story. I mentioned we're opening some new sites. In particular, this is an exciting one. New York City came to us and said, we would like to build a climate technology hub. They have a building in Brooklyn, which was the largest building in the world when it was built. It's called the Brooklyn Army Terminal. And they're going to give us $100 million to build this hub. They want to attract climate entrepreneurs from all over the world. Projects like this are cropping up in many places around the world. And I'm going to talk about what we've learned about how to make these successful. Here are some examples of some of the larger hubs in the world. I've mentioned some of our own, but in Singapore there's one called Launchpad that a wholly owned subsidiary of the government built. It's the largest in Asia. In France, there's a place called Station F. They took an old train service yard. It's about 500,000 square feet, and it's now the largest startup hub in France. These things are happening quite a bit. The new trend, however, is not these general innovation hubs that are just any kind of startup, but really more focused hubs like Bio360. They go into one particular industry and have all of the equipment and resources needed for a particular industry. So UC Berkeley, I'm sure many of you, and I've met people here that have a Berkeley connection, has one of the biggest of these on the west coast of the United States. LabCentral, that we mentioned earlier, is the biggest on the east coast in the United States and the biggest in the world. But there are also similar facilities in other topic areas, like Mass Robotics, which I also co-founded, is the largest robotics shared hub in the world, and it's in Boston. This is kind of where the trend is going. Just a little bit about LabCentral that I mentioned. In the last couple of years, we are getting between 1/5 and 1/6 of all life sciences seed and Series A investment in the entire United States is flowing into this one building next to MIT. It is, if you come out of MIT now and you have a life sciences idea, this is the only place you're going to go. There are hundreds of life sciences companies there. Of course, you're going to pursue your own company, and there's good lab space, but also you're going to run into other entrepreneurs who have good connections with investors. The investors and the large corporate acquirers come visiting on a regular basis. So you're kind of in what we would call ground zero for life sciences innovation. The goal really is to create an effect similar to what we call the Hollywood effect. If you want to make movies, there are only two places in the world, Hollywood and Bollywood, where you might do that. Because the expertise is all concentrated in those places. You will find all of the people who know not just the directors, but the actors and the people who know how to manage cameras and all of the other details in these complex industries. They're all right there. That's really what you're trying to do, is build a kind of a miniature Hollywood around your industry. Ideally, you're also perceived as the best place in the world to do the particular industry that you're focused on. And one of the ways that you might do that, by the way, is to pick an area of specialty which is narrow enough that you get known as the top for that. So, for instance, in New York City, we're looking at the possibility of creating a hub within the hub for our climate hub, which is the world's expert hub for water waste management and sewer systems, because there's no hub in the world around sewer systems. If we become known as the expert in that narrow area, we expect that interesting startups from Japan or Taiwan or India, Europe, will come to New York City to be part of our hub. So one of my pieces of advice for Kerala will be to think about what is the area within the sciences that you can be the world's best, not just a good player, but the world's best. Something to think about. Well, this is just what it looks like inside LabCentral. So this idea of specializing hubs has become popular. There are 3 hubs around the world right now, for instance, that are focusing on cell and gene therapy specifically, a subfield of life sciences, one in New York, one in Berlin, and one in Seoul. And there's a hub in Japan that's going to focus just on regenerative medicine, as an example. So these are just some ways of thinking about how you can specialize or focus even within a particular field like life sciences. As I've seen what you're doing in Kerala, I think you're on the right track, and I'm just going to talk about what some of the things are that you're doing in this area. These hubs should be like a little miniature city. They should have everything that you would expect or need as a startup to support you. So yes, they would have accelerators and incubators. That doesn't mean they are an accelerator or incubator, because you also want the strongest entrepreneurs to be there, and they don't usually go to accelerators. So this should be a city of entrepreneurs, some very early stage, some very late stage and very experienced. You want the industry players also there. You want companies, I think Haier is here with their equipment company. Samsung is here and plays in this industry. You want companies like that to be present as well. Of course, you want the sort of physical infrastructure, the wet labs and maker spaces and things like that. But you also want the participation of government, the policymakers, the people who set regulations. You want everyone aligned and everyone talking so that you can move in the same direction. And I see that you are doing that. You want these hubs to be neutral. So we advise, for instance, not to have one big company that dominates, and you don't, which is good. You can imagine, for instance, a strong company like Tata might say, I'm going to build the Tata Innovation Hub. That would be a mistake, because then only their friends will come. It becomes a kind of parochial group. What you really want and what you have is an open hub for everyone. But many people make this mistake. You want this to be a place that people want to be. So you need to focus on place making. The smartest entrepreneurs have a lot of choices. They could stay in Kerala, or they could move to Boston, or move to London, or somewhere else. So you need to make this just a place they want to be. Think about work as a kind of a resort. We're here in the Leela, which is such a beautiful place. My wife came with me on this trip, and she is so happy. She went for a massage yesterday, and she's going to go again today, and she says the food here is incredible. You can take lessons from the Leela and apply it to your innovation hub, right? You want your innovation hub to be that good so that not just the entrepreneur, but their spouse also says, okay, we're going to stay here. This is so great. You know, I went to California on business, but it was not as nice. I like it here. You want that kind of conclusion, okay? You want to have a big public hall where big events like this one take place. We were there yesterday, and you have something like this. You also want lots of events. You want that to be the watering hole where everyone comes and they hear about the advances in the industry and they get to know each other. Some people think of these hubs as hardware, meaning the buildings, but it's important to understand that they're also software. That's the programs that run inside them, the way that people are connected. We encourage a good balance of the hardware focus and the software focus. Sometimes for government, it's easier to subsidize the hardware. Here's some money to build buildings. And they say, but I don't know about the programming, you know, the operating costs, the people, all those events. You need to push back and you say, okay, we need just as much software as hardware. A good computer with no software is worthless. So we think that you need to activate the ecosystem. That means you really need to invest heavily in getting everyone, the way you are here at the BioConnect 3.0 today, this is innovation ecosystem activation. You need to do that all year long, many, many times in different ways. So we have big annual gatherings like this. We also have small gatherings every week. We have something called Venture Cafe. It's nonprofit. But we get 400 or 500 people together at our Venture Cafe in Cambridge, Massachusetts, every week. Like this, but every week. And that is how you build the connections, and you build the trust, and you build the relationships, and more money flows, investment flows, and ideas flow. So think about ways to do that. There's data that show that better connected ecosystems have better output. In other words, more valuable companies, more IPOs. This is an index of ecosystem success mapped against ecosystem connectedness. So that's the gist of my talk, and I think I have time for some questions and so forth. But I don't know, am I allowed to do questions? Who's in charge? Well, I'm just going to take questions if somebody has a question. Praveen, is that okay? Yeah, that's a yes? Okay, so do we have someone with a microphone? Yeah, it's going to be out.
Simple and straightforward one.
Can you bring the microphone up, please? Try again.
It's pretty simple and straightforward one. When is CIC coming to India or Kerala?
So the question is, when is CIC coming to India or Kerala? Thank you for inviting me. You're the first. Of course, we are very glad to be here and getting to know you. We don't have any plans yet in India, but a couple of people I've talked to have said that we should think about it, and we'll certainly think about it. Thank you.
Ms. Suresh, tell us about some exciting innovations coming out of your lab.
Probably the most exciting innovations that we're seeing today, for me personally, are in cell and gene therapy. You may be familiar with the field, but I don't know if everyone in the room is familiar with the field. One of the companies that grew up within our laboratory, we have several laboratories. One grew up in our laboratory in Philadelphia, is a company called Spark Therapeutics. How many of you know Spark Therapeutics? Okay, so some of you. So I think you probably know that in this field of cell and gene therapy, what we're talking about doing is modifying the genes in our own bodies now during our lifetime. So this is not modifying your genes so that your children can have better genes. This is modifying your own genes. And there are certain situations where it's possible to do this, particularly if your genetic disorder leads some cells to die. You can take some cells and edit their genes and cultivate a healthy cell and then reintroduce it into the body. And if you're lucky, it will multiply and replace the genes that are unhealthy. So these folks at Spark Therapeutics, they originally did their work at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia and then also in our center, CIC Labs in Philadelphia. They found that they could take blind people, a certain category of people that could not see, not all blind people, but a subcategory, and with a single injection of their cell and gene therapy, they could allow them to see again forever. Just one injection. So there's many examples of this kind of technology spreading right now. It's not easy, and it can be expensive, and there could be a longer conversation about whether what the prospects are, but this is one of the most promising frontiers right now in life sciences, and it really stands on the back of our increasing understanding of genetics. So that's one example that I'm very excited about. Yes, Piyush.
Hey, Tim, hi. I think it was really crisp, really wonderful hearing about this. One thing that caught my attention was the venture cafe that you spoke about. There are two parts to the question. One, firstly, how do you frame this venture cafe? Is it like some regulatory body that you come together? And second, when we're talking about the collaboration and you spoke about isolation is an enemy to innovation, is there a possibility where a venture cafe can be formed between, say, Boston and Kerala or Boston, India, where we can have some funders from there working with the innovators from here in India?
Great question, Piyush. So the question was about, first of all, how this venture cafe activity works that I mentioned. And I went over it kind of quickly in my talk. And then, can it be used to connect two different places like Boston and Kerala? So on the first point, we have, I think, 15 venture cafes now running around the world. So in Tokyo and Berlin, we just opened in London, Boston, and other places like that. And it is typically a nonprofit organization, typically funded by the government. So we recently received a grant, for instance, from the UK government to fund Venture Cafe in 3 cities in the UK, in London, Manchester, and Edinburgh. And it's seen as a public investment in the fabric of innovation, the innovation community. Governments historically have made public investments of many kinds. We're all very familiar that our cities have roads, and those roads are usually built by the government, right? And the government understands that with this public infrastructure, people can get around and you can have commerce and get to school and work, and without them, your city would not function. Historically, governments have not really recognized the importance of what we call innovation infrastructure. They understand education or academic infrastructure, and many governments have built universities, without which we would not have invention, without which we would not have basic research. But then they kind of stop, and they say, okay, now, after this point, you're on your own, traditionally. In a few places, like in Hyderabad, there's the big T-site facility, and there are other places around the world where governments have leaned in on creating innovation infrastructure, and Bio360 is also an example of that. That's innovation hardware. And as I said earlier, sometimes they don't see as clearly the importance of innovation infrastructure software, right? And so think about Venture Cafe as software that runs on that hardware platform, right? And it's very simple. It's usually a staff of 4 or 5 people. They come up with programming ideas, just like the staff here at Bio360. Are you about to kick me off the stage? Yeah, okay. I started late, though. Don't I get extra time? It's okay. No worries. Anyway, so that's basically how it's run. And then finally, we do a lot of collaborations cross-border. For instance, between Tokyo and Boston, we have teams of entrepreneurs going both directions and pitch sessions and demos and all of that very, very frequently. Thank you. All right, I think that's all my time. Am I right? Okay.
Could you stay there for a few minutes?
Okay, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Tim Rowe. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now invite Mr. APM Muhammad Hanish, IAS, Principal Secretary, Industries, Government of Kerala, to kindly come over to the dais and present a memento to Mr. Tim Rowe.
In deference to the wishes of the audience over here, I would request Mr. Tim Rowe to take one or two questions more, please.
Oh, more questions. Okay. Apparently, more questions. Okay, I got more time. Yes.
My question is about COVID. So post-COVID is change.
So the question was, post-COVID, has anything changed about the importance of being in the same place? Is that, I think I understood that correctly. So the short answer is Steve Jobs is still right, okay? So during COVID, we all learned that it was possible to work remotely. You can get things done on Zoom, it's not nothing. But there was an important observation. We were most successful getting things done with people that we already knew very well, where we had built the human capital relationships already. I could talk to someone I trust already, and they would do something for me, and we could maybe exchange some ideas on Zoom or some online video platform. But it's very, very difficult to build trust remotely. When you meet someone for the first time on a Zoom, and you're talking at a distance like this, we don't end up feeling that we know each other enough to take real risk together. Am I going to write you $1 million check? Probably not, right? Because I just know you this way. We have to sit together. We have to connect together. There's an entrepreneur here in the room, and I won't say her name, that would like to expand into our facility at LabCentral in Cambridge. And she needs some help getting in touch with the leadership, explaining the type of work she's doing, and getting access to that facility. Sitting together in person, I can understand what she's doing, and I can go back to our leadership and say, this is a good project, we should support it. If I just got an email or some kind of quick video call, I don't think I would have the same energy or the same power to connect. So nothing has changed about how humans work fundamentally. Maybe we've gotten a little bit better at getting routine work done at a distance. But as Steve Jobs said, and Andy Jassy at Amazon said something very similar recently, we just cannot invent remotely. You try it?
Question is, of innovation.
So I will try to paraphrase the question and see if I got it right. So sometimes you have large companies, like big pharmas, that have a big vision, and they want to do a lot in innovation. They have some grand plan. It's going to have many parts and many pieces, maybe operate globally in different locations. How does that connect with this notion of innovation hubs? How can you use an innovation hub to support that? Is there a place? Because I'm talking a lot about startups, but what about these big companies? So I mentioned earlier, did I more or less get that right?
Not only big companies, like a person, has a big vision, and that person is one off with innovation, right from diagnostics, right of agriculture, fundamentals of multiomics and biodiversity.
So
And
I'll add to the, if I understand correctly,
Yes.
I'll add to the question also, this could include perhaps a very experienced entrepreneur, an individual with big ideas, capital, a big plan. How would it fit with these kind of innovation hubs, and how would they work? So I mentioned earlier that innovation hubs are not just accelerators. They're not just incubators for the inexperienced and young entrepreneur. An accelerator or an incubator is generally some kind of program to support people who are learning to become an entrepreneur. It might give them a little bit of money and a lot of advice, and that's very helpful for young entrepreneurs. But it's not what the experienced entrepreneur needs or wants. And so if you present your innovation hub, and by the way, you don't here at Bio360, you're doing this correctly, but many of these hubs are presented as accelerators or incubators, and that's good, except that it only attracts those green or those new entrepreneurs. It's kind of like a preschool or kindergarten for entrepreneurs. And that's fine if what your goal is to have a preschool or a kindergarten. But that should not be the goal of a government that's trying to grow its ecosystem, to grow its economy. A government really also needs those very experienced entrepreneurs and, as I mentioned earlier, the big companies. So the hubs themselves should actually embrace everyone from the earliest stage startups, and they may need incubators, all the way up to the most experienced entrepreneurs and also the big companies. The example I gave earlier of Rich Miner, the co-founder of Android, bringing it to my center at Cambridge Innovation Center is a good one. He had already sold a company for $200 million. He did not need anyone to tell him how to do a startup. He was not looking for an incubator or accelerator. What he was looking for was a great place to build his company, great talent, people he could find, a network. Of course, you do need physical space. If you're a life sciences entrepreneur, you also need actual laboratories. You can build them yourself if you have money, but it takes a long time. You have to get all the permits and everything. It slows you down. So these innovation hubs, they should cater from the bottom to the top of the stack of innovators. And even the very biggest companies, they can put innovation programs. So you can see a Pfizer or a Merck or a Johnson & Johnson having a program for a new product inside one of these hubs with 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 innovators working on that. I see that you're doing that here at Bio360, so I think you're very much in line with good global practice.
Are you interested?
Thank you, Mr. Tim Rowe. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you have more questions. Mr. Tim Rowe will be here throughout the day, and you can have a one-on-one in between when we have a break. So, ladies and gentlemen, we now present a memento as a token of our appreciation and gratitude to Mr. Tim Rowe. Presenting the memento is Shri APM Mohammed Hanish, IAS Principal Secretary, Industries, Government of Kerala. Thank you, Mr. Tim Rowe, CEO, Cambridge Innovation Center, and co-founder, LabCentral, Boston, USA. Thank you for being here with us today.